Hi everyone, good morning from Singapore. I am Zing from SGInnovate. We are a government-owned organization that invests in and help build deep tech startups that leverage science and technology to make life better for all. A big part of our work is to build a global community of leaders and doers who are driving deep tech innovations such as AI, medtech, quantum tech in our economy and society. So in today's webinar, we are very happy to have Professor David D. Kramer, founder and director of Center on AI Technology for Humankind and the Provost Chair at NUS Business School. He is also an accomplished author who recently released Leadership by Algorithm, Who Leads and Who Follows in the AI Era. He will be discussing the key areas where algorithms will collide with human skills and assess the likely outcomes. So without further ado, let me pass over the time to Professor David to start the session. David, please.
Thank you, Ziying, and welcome everybody. Let me share the screen. Okay, so thank you for inviting me to give a little bit more of an overview on what I've been working on in the last few years when it comes down to understanding the introduction of algorithms, artificial enabled technologies and platforms in the business context. I think you've all heard that businesses are keen to bring in AI as well, although they are not quite sure always how to do this, and I will come back to this later. But I want to start this presentation with the following idea. Just imagine that today, all business schools in the world have mentioned that there will be no leadership courses anymore. So we won't teach leadership to anyone anymore. I can imagine that some of you will be looking at and saying like, oh, what's happening there? Why would that be the case? Because isn't it the case that leadership courses are so central to most of the modules that we see? And that's true. About 80% of all the lectures that we see at business schools have a word of leadership, leading, being the leader in it, in the title of its modules. What we also see is that most business schools, they train their people, and that's their mission, to be responsible leaders. So the leaders of the future. So it's very, very essential for business schools to focus on leadership. So why would we close school to say so? Why would we say, now school doesn't work anymore, it's closed? Business school wouldn't do this.
Sorry, David, do you mind putting your screen onto full screen? Currently, we
Okay,
can't just see the slides. Sorry about that.
Okay. So business school is closed. Why would we do this? Well, the reason why is a new hero has arrived in our society. And that hero we call artificial intelligence. I don't think it has escaped anyone's attention that for the last decade or so, gurus are pushing each other aside just to make the message clear. Everything's going to change, especially with COVID-19 now. We also see these trends are going to be accelerated. I don't think we're going to have a new normal. I just think that all the trends we've been seeing in terms of technology will be accelerated more now, and that's what we'll be confronted with. So why actually invest then in our people to be leaders? Because AI seems to be able to do many, many things that humans can do as well. So just to give a brief definition of AI, the way I look at it, very simple, so that we can work with it, is that AI, in my view, is machines acting in ways that seems intelligent. And intelligence is a broad concept, but it appears to be intelligent, can do things that humans do, but in certain tasks even better than we do. And there are many benefits to it. And the main benefit, of course, is the economics benefit. PwC calculated that by 2030, the global economy should benefit by approximately 15.7 trillion US dollars. And across surveys worldwide, we see that on average, about 70 to 75% of leaders indicate that AI, robots, automation are the main investment areas.
Hi, David. Hi, this is Tuan from SGInnovate here. We can actually still see your Zoom setting box on the screen. Okay. Would you try to, close and...
Sorry. Okay.
Oh, perfect. Thank you.
Everything, okay. So what we see is that AI is indeed the new hero. It's going to change everything because we'll have to invest in it. In my own center, we saw that when we did a survey in the Asia region, that about 96% of companies already adopted AI in one way or another. But that's adoption. So employment itself is a much bigger issue because it means that we have to make a business case about how are we going to use AI, for what reason, how does it relate to strategy, and that's a much more complicated issue. But when we look at the interest in AI and the willingness to adopt, it's definitely there. It's definitely happening. So it actually has related to the following question that what we see is that people are starting to wonder, isn't AI going to take my job? But also, are they going to start running our organizations? Because we see that many of them are moving into decision-making roles even. AI is not only a tool today, AI is also an advisor. He's even a co-worker. He's putting advice out there that we use in our decisions. And I think this guy here, and most of you will probably know him, Lee Sedol, the South Korean world champion in the Chinese board game Go. He was defeated by AI in 2016. And that was actually expected to be impossible because it's such a complicated board game, but it did. AI beat the world champion. And it actually went so far that he is a representation, in my view, that humans may submit to machine at one point, because at the end of 2019, he retired from the game, saying, this is the end for humans. AI will take over. So if a world champion says it, it created a lot of buzz there. There's also several authors, books being published, where we see that authority, as they say, is going to be increasingly expressed in an algorithmic way. So for example, the Black Box Society, the book by Frank Pascal, he makes that claim very strong. Authority is going to be algorithmic. So what does that mean for our businesses? So I just want to show you a slide now, how innovation usually works when we start using innovation and how it transfers the way we run our organization. So if it's true that we're going to be submitting more and more to machine, our dependence increases on AI, our mindsets will change. What we'll see is that the mindsets, meaning our decision makers, we will comply with the fact that it's becoming more and more automated. We'll see, like, first of all, we use the innovation and we replicate. So robots, algorithms enter in the decision-making phase. We replicate humans, jobs are disappearing. Then the next phase is usually we scale up. So it becomes in every layer of the whole organization. And once that has become an issue, then there's a new system. And in this case, it may be, if we have algorithmic decision-making across every layer, it may be this, yes, AI may become our new boss. And if AI becomes our new boss, there'll be new norms of working. There'll be new expectations. There'll be a different mindset of how we make decisions, for what reason, and what will be the role of humans. So this would be a trajectory that could happen when we submit. So this is something that made me think a lot in the last few years. And I decided to write a book on it called Leadership by Algorithm: Who Leads and Who Follows in the AI Era. So I also have my own story, of course, in this book. It's about 25 years ago, when I was a very young scholar still. I was confronted with several people at a big business event, and they were always expressing how important it was to push the limits, to be successful. So I was listening in awe, and at one point I asked the question and said, like, but if you keep pushing the limits, I mean, at one point it may go wrong. And they said, no, 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 science and technology will always be there. I have complete faith in this. So I started thinking, and when I was writing this book, it came back to me, and I thought, like, oh, well, actually these guys, they were very dependent on technology. They were willing to be dependent on technology in order to be successful themselves. But they still thought they were in charge. But of course, we have this kind of technology now that you can become dependent on it. And maybe today, our senior leaders, our executives are not that confident anymore. And I see this in my own classrooms as well. So when I teach for executives, I always have senior leaders coming up to me saying, but professor, why do I invest in learning soft skills? Why do I still take care of certain things that I feel automation can do? Plus, I'm actually afraid of my job as well. The ones in charge are afraid of my job. Shouldn't I become a coder? Usually when someone's close to 50, yes, you can, as a hobby, you can try to understand, at least that you understand where you make decisions. But becoming a full-time coder, changing your profession at that point, it's not a smart idea. And actually, you don't need to either. Because all the experience you've had in pursuing strategies, creating value, having a business plan are still needed to make sure AI is the appropriate position within the company. So it really, all these thoughts, all these experiences really motivated me to start writing this book and what actually will be the future when it comes down to running our organizations. And it's not just a reflective work like Financial Times said about my book. It's really something that we see happening in real time. So if we look at what does leadership mean? Leadership usually means that we have the person who fits best with the requirements of the situation that we're confronted with. So what kind of situations are usually out there? Well, situations today are very fast moving. They're very volatile. They're uncertain. There's complexity. There's a lot of ambiguity. And this is what we call the VUCA world, V-U-C-A. Things are moving fast. It's uncertain. We have to try to make sense of it. And you can already see who fits very well with that kind of description. Yes, it is AI. AI works in consistent ways. It's rational, works much faster and more accurate at the same time. So could it be that AI, because of its fit with these situational demands, will move into the role of a leader? What we'll see is that who follows will always decide who will be the leader. And in this case, as humans, we are very good followers at the moment when it comes down to AI. Look, why do we want AI? Oh, it's reducing costs. It's going to make it more efficient. It's going to optimize our prediction models. Hopefully, over time, we will create more value. We'll create a more perfect working organization, perfect working nation or society. So in a way, we're putting ourselves in a follower role. There's research that shows like, okay, if something can satisfy your needs, you become much more attached to it, even addicted to it, because it affects your reward circuits in your brain. Think about your smartphone. Technology has that impact. All of us are on our smartphones all the time. Once you get bored, you look at your smartphone. You start working on your smartphone. So in a way, AI seems to have, or AI-enabled technologies moving into decision-making roles will have that appeal. And the business model of tomorrow may be this, where we follow an AI, it ultimately will lead because of the requirements that we need in terms of the situations that we face. And think about it. In a way, we already have it. AI manages us already. The most simple example is traffic. We see the traffic lights, they'll guide us. But it's a very simple example. But we already see that companies are using it as well. Especially now during COVID-19, the circuit breaker, you're following the algorithms telling you which movies you want to see on Netflix. You've chosen this kind of movies, they'll come up with more of these kind of movies. Of course, it's a business model. They try to get you in the system and use it more often. By the way, we're actually exploring also something that is counterintuitive to Netflix, because Netflix gives you more of the same once you've decided who you are. In a way, we're looking at algorithms that may give you a counterpoint of view, because there's also a narrowing effect, of course. If you use algorithms this way, you only keep doing or looking or reading what you like. You don't get to know the other parts of life. So we're also seeing whether we can train algorithms to bring in just opposite ideas so that you can explore broader points of view. But you see, algorithms can quickly have a guiding, directing function. The same thing with YouTube. It works in the same way. Makes you watch more movies. We also see that companies are starting to really focus on bringing in AI as a decision maker and looking and observing who are the best leaders, how do they act. And one way to do this is, for example, looking at neural imprints of successful CEOs to create highly efficient decision-making algorithms. AI is also being appointed in the board of directors, or when it comes down to compliance, governance. AI will become part of that, will become almost like an autonomous decision maker. And this is a picture of robots at an assembly line directing people. It's a cartoon, but it's out there. Amazon uses this. They have a warehouse tracking system where algorithms keep track of what you're doing, directing you, trying to motivate you to work harder because based on your statistics, you're doing well, you're not doing well. But what is important here is they also have received discretion to fire you. So without any human involvement. So they're the decision maker. They're literally leading these teams at the warehouse tracking systems. And what is interesting is that during COVID-19, certain startups who've been working on that, on robots, on algorithms, who can be used for supervising tasks, the demand for that has increased by a factor 4. Companies want their people working remotely to be supervised, to be managed. So we see there's so much to be said. AI can move into a role where it will run an organization because of its traits, because it fits the requirements of a situation. We already see it happening in terms of its applications. But really running an organization of human employees, we should reflect a little bit more. And that's what I've been trying to do in the book. So usually what we see from a social science point of view is that when do we submit to authority? When we trust them. When we feel it's legitimate what they're deciding. When we feel like this is something well justified, well reasoned, and reasoning is going to be one of the issues because as many of you know, that's a problem, for example, when we implement robots. Reasoning is a big problem for them. But that's when humans decide to follow a leader, to comply with its directives, when these things are there. And is this something that algorithms can provide? That should be the question. Because all of these things are usually evoked when a human sees a leader who's authentic, who can provide the right justifications, legitimate reasons, and there's a trust-building process going on. And there I would like to draw the distinction already between what I call artificial intelligence versus authentic intelligence. There are two types of AI today that we have to talk about in my view. And also, this guy is really important, not the author, Cumberbatch, but Turing. He played in the role in the movie The Imitation Game. He played Turing's part. During World War II, Turing cracked the Enigma code of the Germans. And many of his ideas are still guiding today's AI development. So what we see there is that when we learn, humans learn, we observe, but we also learn the meaning. We understand the meaning. We can put it in perspective and we can make inferences. So we end up with a bigger spectrum than only the observation itself. So Turing was known because he wanted to see, can basically computer, can he or she be intelligent? And he developed the Turing test, seeing that if you can't see the computer, you have a conversation and you feel like, oh, this is a human, you can't make a distinction anymore. Yes, computers can be considered as intelligent decision makers because humans don't see the difference anymore. But the big thing there is that we learned this in his test by means of observation. We look at observations. And this is also how AI, for example, learns. When we look at machine learning, we feed them with examples. They learn features, we put it in vectors. We supervised learning, for example, or unsupervised learning where neural networks come in. It all works the same. They learn from observations and try to get the best optimal model out of it. Okay, and this raises a few questions. Can this be then seen as something that's authentic? Is this authentic leadership when we do it via an algorithm? Well, it looks like it, but it isn't. Hence why the movie used The Imitation Game. It imitates. And that's where we're going to run into a few boundary conditions when it comes down to having AI move into leadership roles. Just a simple example. This is a few years ago in Oregon, in the US. A woman called 991 to report that there was someone breaking into the house. So she was really scared. The person picking up heard the voice saying, "Hi, could I order a pizza?" So the person said right away, "Yeah, I'm sorry, ma'am, but we're not a pizza house. We don't deliver pizza." She said, "No, I need a pizza." And he said, like, again, "We don't deliver pizzas." "Yes, but I would like to have my pizza with a special ingredient." So the person became suspicious and started asking questions. "Ma'am, are you alone?" And she said, "No, I don't need, no, I don't need that." "So you're not alone?" "No, you're not." So the suspicion was there, and eventually the police came, arrested the person. We know that AI will have more problems doing that because very rationally, we're not a pizza house. You ask for a pizza, we can't deliver. So the intuition part there, the authentic emotion recognition, makes humans different already in dealing with this. And it's also what we expect from our leaders. So machine learning methods, they excel in imitating the real world, but they often lack the real understanding of that world, what it means especially to humans, because if you're going to lead, you need to know that you can make decisions that are meaningful and will have an impact on the world, the ones you're leading. So does this mean that although it seems to have all the assets to run your organization, AI is limited in certain ways? And that's the case. But it doesn't mean that AI will not help running your organizations. If we look at the management literature, there are two types of running an organization. We call it management and leadership, and they're not the same. Many people equate both concepts. Managers are the same like leaders, but that's not true. So I just want to make that distinction a little bit more. So if we look at what is currently being automated, then we see like automation happens when AI can be used as a tool, just like a spreadsheet, for example, or an advisor. It can assess certain things very quickly, come up with information and provides advice, or even as a manager to some extent. Like I have already explained, certain tasks AI can guide, very simple, lower level tasks, routine and repetitive tasks. So we see that, for example, another example of this managing is that algorithms are, for example, being used to monitor employees in their behaviors at work. And researchers have found now that putting together certain of these observations can actually predict whether the employee is going to leave early or not, whether they want to get out of the company because they don't like it, which is displayed in their behaviors, or not. So these are the ways as a tool, advisor and manager, that we see AI is already being used. What is also interesting is that if you look at what managers do, human managers, and we see that about 54% of their time they spend on administrative tasks involving data management, information, working consistently, repetitively, and routine. So you can already see it. Those kind of tasks, they're prey for algorithms. And it's going to be replaced. And I call this in my book, Management by Algorithm, the new MBA. Of course, when I say this in my classes, the new MBA, students sometimes think like, oh, what do you mean? So I'm going to be replaced completely? Yes, well, if you only have a management mindset, that may happen. So you need a little bit more spice. So coming back to my earlier message, all business schools were going to close leadership courses. I don't think that's going to happen, because I think the leadership mindset, which is in addition to the management mindset, is definitely the thing that we need to create more among our students. But if we look at management, what is management according to the literature? Management tries to seek for stability. It's very methodologically consistent. It organizes, tries to have a control system. It evaluates based on that. You're ticking the box mentality, and brings stability. All things that algorithms can do even so much better. So management will definitely be part of AI. AI will take that over the years. And in a way, it's maybe not a bad thing, because Boston Consulting Group last year published a report, or did some research and published a report this year, showing that most people nowadays in their 20s and 30s, they don't want to be managers anymore. They're much more interested in being an expert or interested in taking up positions where they have independence or can really make an impact, the leadership roles. So in a way, it may nicely come together. Humans don't want to be managers anymore. Algorithms seem perfectly suited for it. But allow me to go back to the example that I provided of Amazon and their assembly line, where robots, algorithms were basically supervising humans and could even fire them. This has been described in the media in the last year or so. And although it seems very efficient, there were also some side effects that were pretty negative. And it led to these kind of situations where people came out on the streets. People didn't want to work for Amazon anymore because why? They felt they were treated like robots themselves. So they were making very clear, we don't want to be robots. We are not robots because a system that keeps processing in a very accurate, consistent, repetitive way the goals you need to meet based on your performances. Remember, everything's observations, we feed that. After a while, it becomes very mechanistic. There's a mechanistic exchange, and that's the only thing. But humans need more. And it works perfectly if your people become machines as well, because machines are creating a culture that is best suited for machines. Hence why people say, we are not machines, we're not robots, we're something else. And we need to take this criticism very seriously, because who are we actually building a workplace for? The human end user, not the machine as end user. Douglas Rushkoff, for people who are really interested in this argument in Team Human, makes a very compelling case for this. So the end user of any decision-making process is always humans when technology is involved, and not technology itself. And I see this kind of mindset emerge very quickly. And the most famous case that I've encountered is the case with Facebook. So before coming to Singapore, I was a professor at the University of Cambridge, and I was there when Cambridge Analytica case started. I did some investigations on this thing as well. And at one point in 2018, Mark Zuckerberg said that he realized that he was also responsible for the people using the Facebook platform. Of course, Mark, you're responsible. You designed it. But until 2018, he did not even realize or was not aware of it. He thought his main job was to make the best platform out there possible. Think like very much an engineer, the technology matters most. But if you keep doing this, of course, after a while, you get these kind of construction of workplaces that feel like it's for humans and not like for technology, but not for humans. Okay. So this is where we see the boundary conditions come in, where AI can go in the process of running an organization. It's at the management level, but once we move into motivating people, giving them meaning and an understanding of a situation, what it means to them, what it means to the organization, it's a different ballgame. And this is because people expect their leaders to be compassionate as well. And let's face it, AI fails there. AI doesn't care whether you die tomorrow or not. There's no compassion. Also that there's tolerance. Sometimes things go wrong. You fail, you evaluate, give feedback, you move on. AI focuses on the reduction of error rates as much as possible. So in optimizing, it searches for perfectionism. So it's not meeting that criteria that much either. And then the humanity aspect, like I elaborated just a minute ago, you feel it is a humane workplace. It's important to keep motivating people, to keep them loyal, to keep them committed, to make sure that all the unique abilities that humans have, the creativity, the curiosity, that this is still part of their job experience as well. It needs to be humane. And of course, AI in that sense, and we see this with natural language processing, where algorithms have a problem really inferring the meaning of a word and then bringing it back to the context as it is presently, AI has that problem as well. So these are really the boundary conditions where we see, we need something else. Because leadership is not just management. You need it as a foundation, but whereas management is about stability, controlling a status quo and making it optimal. Leadership is about change. If things change, we need someone to give direction, explain why, what kind of value we're going to create, and to make a change happen. But you can only make a change happen, of course, if the team, if the collective works along. So you need to be able to influence, to connect with people, to make that change happen. And those are qualities that AI doesn't have. So for example, already dealing with change. Well, AI works best when the statistics are stationary. If it's non-stationary, mean variance, standard deviation, everything changes, it's difficult. We can't take different perspectives from an AI point of view. Leaders connect. As the editor of Nature Human Machine told me, she considered humans to be good at cooperation because we can do the subtle, influential things. AI can't. It can't do these things, doesn't understand it. Providing meaning to things. Why do we have to do things? Or if certain changes happen, make it meaningful to the ones who are following. AI doesn't have empathy, emotional intelligence, or imagination why it would happen. That explanation will not be able to be provided. And also make it worthwhile, purposeful to people. Why do we change? What kind of value are we creating and why? It requires that we understand the expectations people have based on societal norms, based on what they expect. That kind of sensitivity, that kind of awareness, sense-making. And that's also missing. So those are 4 different dimensions that are very important that for leadership, but that we see that AI is not likely to acquire very quickly. Because what I see at the moment is that AI is rapidly advancing, but it's rapidly advancing and executing tasks still. But the one boundary we always bump into is when it comes down to reasoning, sense-making. And that's in every level of AI development. So, of course, we need to train our human leaders. We need to have leadership courses, but with a specific focus much more on the traits that humans have. Curiosity, imagination, emotional intelligence, the ability to make ethical judgments. We need to focus even more on those to make sure that we can contribute this in the most optimal way to how we run our organizations. And it's not just reskilling or even unskilling. I don't like the word unskilling. It's as if like humans don't have anything that's good for today's organization. Of course they have, I just told you. It's about having the skills available, elaborate on them and bring it together with new skills that you can learn, especially in leadership roles. And this is a big passion of mine. It really starts with our children already. If you take a look at this picture, I found this at a local school saying, oh, we're trying to promote the creativity among our children. And what you see there is children sitting very nicely in rows in the same position, with the same clothes, in the same position behind the piano. It seems like it's creativity within a box, but creativity is outside of the box. So we really need to do more on these things. We really need to have our kids kind of an experience where they can explore, where they can be curious, and that's sharpened rather than that we try to put them in boxes as soon as possible, because that's what algorithms can do better. Also, because of this, I don't think my senior leaders, executives in my classes need to be afraid that they'll be replaced by robots. I like this cartoon because it says, as you can see on the whiteboard, I'm not a robot. So the robot's saying, so it's agreed, we need to hire a human to get around these. I don't think that situation is going to happen very quickly. So the fear is also not justified. But we do need to put more effort into really training our leaders in ways that meet the demands of an AI-driven society, AI-driven organization. In my book, I identified 2 types of leaders from a social science point of view that we really need to train. And the first one is inclusive leadership. So inclusive leadership is really needed because with working with so many data in our organizations, we bring in a lot of data scientists. And usually what we see in organizations, we create silos very quickly. And data scientists are also siloed very quickly. So I think it's an important task of leaders is really to make sure that data scientists are a part of the organization and that they get to know sales and marketing, HR, finance departments, because there's data everywhere. And they need to know the challenges that all these departments are facing, which kind of data and questions are out there, to build a much more better integrative platform where the C-suite can have all the information available. So it's really about leadership that can bring this all together. So that means you welcome diversity of thought. Divergent thinking is very important for leaders to promote. Building trust amongst departments, between people, that people connect. It's an important skill for leaders in the 21st century. Another type of leader, and the second type that I identify in my book that we need to train, is purpose-driven leader. And purpose actually already goes back to the early stages of AI research. If you look at the quote of Norbert Wiener, the founder of cybernetics, he said, if we use to achieve our purposes a mechanical agency with whose operation we cannot efficiently interfere, once we have started, it's because the action is so fast and irrevocable that we don't have the data to intervene before the action is complete, then we better be quite sure that the purpose put into the machine is the purpose which we really desire, and not just an imitation of it. So this refers to the garbage in, garbage out principle, of course, where we see that we need leaders who know the kind of value they want to achieve, which strategy they're going to employ, and what kind of data that requires. And that we need a lot of those data. We need to be focused in the beginning. We need to be able to anticipate. We need to understand the purpose, and everyone needs to do this, because else we get lost in the data that's out there, and we may put the wrong data in our models, and it's not going to serve our companies. So the main conclusions, and then I want to answer some questions, is from my book is the three key messages that I really want to get across is that, first of all, when we look at leadership, it's a human activity and it will remain one. I think we need human skills and we need to really train them better. We need to put them in better perspective from a young age onwards. And those skills will help us to create value that goes beyond just doing well at a task and optimize that and getting more and better financial returns. It's also long-term thinking. It's creating a humane workplace. It's about long-term vision. Also, in this book, some of my frustrations have been, and I think many of you can share with that probably, is that much of our leadership today is also not really showing good leadership. So I'm a little bit frustrated also with how our authorities are acting today. So given the fact that it's so important that the skills that we attribute to good leaders are needed in an AI-driven organization, society, we really need better leaders, and we really need better leadership education. So we need to focus on that. The second thing is that from all these developments, what you do see is management by algorithm is going to have a leadership by algorithm, not that much, but they work together. So AI is a co-worker in the sense that, and it's a cooperative process. And many people have started to emphasize this. It's all about cooperation, but it's not easy for organizations to find the right shape, format of cooperation itself. I refer to the picture of Jarvis in Iron Man, just a rather very intelligent system, which is a famous example. And most people will think of this, oh, robots working together with humans, although robots, because they need to sense, coordinate, navigate, it's not that easy. But there are many different ways. And what we see today, for example, one of the cooperative processes that I work with a lot is that we see AI-enabled platforms to help design and innovation teams. They can look for information quickly, can bring it together. They prefer as an input, as an advisor to these teams. More information, better solutions. C-suite can work better with it in terms of strategy. That's a cooperative process. And I want to point out two concepts that most people will not think of right away as a cooperative process, but that we're working on in our center. The first one is creative, being creative. Creativity, in my view, will also be a cooperative process. Creativity is creating something new that is meaningful and useful for people. So the new thing, AI can do very quickly. They can find all kinds of combinations. That's a first stage, but putting meaning to it so that it's meaningful to people. I mean, AI can make a lot of different pizzas, research has shown, but they can put ingredients together that you never want to eat. But they don't have a sense of awareness that you won't eat it, that humans don't like this. So in that final stage, we will always need human input. But creativity in that sense, and we'll publish soon a theoretical model on this, will be a cooperative process as well. The other thing is fairness. Can AI be fair? This is something we very much focus on in our center. And I also see this as a cooperative process in one way or another. AI is usually looked at, oh, it's much more rational. So it's going to be less biased. The biases that humans show, because humans are irrational. That's true to some extent, but as we've also seen with several examples, the Amazon example is also a famous one where HR used algorithms and came up with a very selective recruitment strategy where only white men were considered for certain jobs because the data included that bias. And AI, because reducing error rates as much as possible, doesn't take that into account because it doesn't have that awareness. And that's where you see the cooperation. Although humans may be biased, humans are pretty good at finding out what other people are doing. And they're much more abstract and rational when it comes down to evaluating others. And when it comes down to evaluating AI, the output the AI creates, humans can put that in terms of, in the perspective of society, the norms that we have, the awareness, but also the sensitivities that we experience. AI does not have those. So in that sense, it will always be a cooperative process in that sense as well. And the final thing is that it's clear that the key point is always going to be to have a human-centered approach when we move artificial intelligence into the more impactful actions that it undertakes. It may seem intelligent, but for our more impactful decisions, we need a sense of awareness. We need sense-making, and we need emotional intelligence. And I like this quote of Max Weber. He said, the more perfectly bureaucracy develops, the more it's dehumanized. The more completely it succeeds in eliminating from business love, hatred, and all purely personal, irrational, and emotional elements which escape calculation. And you see, this is where it's very simple to infer that, yes, management, because it's closely related to bureaucracy nowadays, that's where algorithms step in. But we can't only manage our organizations. We have to lead them because else we're going to dehumanize them anyway. So it addresses also the fact that we need to focus much more on understanding a human-centered use of AI. I hear this term a lot, but I also see that a lot of them, people don't use it in the right and appropriate way. Human-centered is not only understanding you're doing it for a human end user and that's sufficient. That's the first step. But it's really thinking about what will be the implications when we implement certain AI technologies. Are these implications that we want to see from a societal point of view? And this relates also a little bit to what Steve Jobs said at one point. Look, you may have the technology, doesn't mean you need to use it. And this is what we do in our Center on AI Technology for Humankind as well at NUS. So this brings it all together. So I want to open the floor now. I see there's a number of questions as well to see this, to respond to a few of them. Okay. Increasingly to be. So there's a question here, but AI is increasingly be able to compose music and paint drawings. So is it really tenable for humans to maintain our edge in creativity? That's a very good question. And like I said, they're very advanced. And yes, certain paintings can be replicated in such a way you don't see the difference. So people will buy it. But it's still an observation. AI doesn't have imagination. So creating something new in terms of a new art form will still have to come from humans because of the lack of imagination. But here's an interesting experiment as well for you. When we showed people paintings that looked an exact replication of the real work, people were just as persuaded by it. But then when you say it's created by AI, value suddenly drops. People don't want it anymore. And that's a kind of emotional connection they have when they know who is responsible for the output. And that's when I refer to the two AIs, artificial intelligence versus authentic intelligence. Okay. Okay, clear. Okay. Question here, can you comment on what kind of major changes need to happen in our education with the growing prominence of AI? I think, yeah, it's twofold. So there's a parallel. What we see happening in Singapore, the investment in skills, technological skills, are very much needed. So I think an understanding of the skills, coding, introductory course to Python, all these things definitely matter. So we see there's a very strong emphasis on the STEM graduates, and that's all fine. But like I said, it's a parallel process. I also would like to see something else that doesn't necessarily have to do with coding, because we don't only need coders, we also need coders who can put things in perspective and don't end up in the Zuckerberg scenario that I described, which is that people are attuned like this, that our mindset really becomes on replicating more of what we're doing. And if we develop a technology without being too much aware of it, we become almost the technology itself. So we need a broader kind of education as well. And like I said, this starts with our children. We don't want to label them right away. We don't want to categorize them right away. If we want them to be creative and curious people, because AI doesn't have curiosity, I think it's important that when they're younger, that they experience, at least for the first few years, ways that they can be unlimited in their creativity, in their spontaneity, that at least they experience this. If at age 2 we already put them in a box, they're never going to experience this. So education has to change in that sense that, yes, we need to prepare them in ways that they know what the world is doing. So that's technology. But in addition, we need also the personal development, because that personal development is going to bring in our authentic intelligence, the second type of intelligence. So it's a parallel way. Okay, this is an interesting question. This is an interesting question. How do we encode free will into AI? Sometimes the best decision for a situation is not the most algorithmically efficient one. Isn't this where humans will always have to step in, no matter how sophisticated AI gets? I completely agree. So that's why I was emphasizing these boundary conditions. First of all, AI will not have free will because AI doesn't have any intentions. So just to give you an example, so when Uber uses an algorithm to decide how to pay their drivers, for example, they'll accept this more from an algorithm than from a boss, especially if the salary increase will not be that much as they expected. We're quickly there to blame a human because we will think that that was his or her intention. But we know an algorithm doesn't have intentions. So, and this is also what I mentioned. With every application that we see with AI and the development itself, we see rapid developments. But no matter you talk to someone who develops robots, works in natural language processing, in machine learning, they will all say the same thing at the end of the day. The problem will become the reasoning, coming up with the new things that they understand is going to be meaningful, because they don't have the meaning of what it means to be human. And we will all, that's a problem we will running into, and most of them don't know when we're going to solve this. This is going to take at least several decades. We can imitate. So when we talk about emotional intelligence for AI, we're still talking about imitation of emotions that people will recognize. And yes, because of their reward centers in the brain, will respond to it almost as much as we will respond to emotions of a person. But once we realize, again, it's from a machine, it will lose its power. Like I gave the illustration with creativity. Once they knew the painting was made by an algorithm, it lost value. So in order, and this is why I link it to leadership, in order to keep people motivated, there needs to be an authentic element. Okay, to ensure fairness of outcomes of AI, shouldn't algorithms code be made transparent so they can be controlled? Yes, of course. So this is something that's happening worldwide, but also Singapore in the second version of their AI governance documents, they're very much emphasizing this. So it needs to be made transparent. But of course, here we start with a conceptual issue again. What's transparency? So because for many people, an algorithm and AI is a black box. So what is transparency means can be like we know the code. And this is happening, for example, now. At this moment, when in Singapore, we're talking about the wearable device we all will have to wear because most people don't download the app. So we'll have a wearable device. And the government has said, like, it's open source. So everyone can check the code and you can see that after a number of days, your data will be erased. So if in that period of time you didn't become sick, your data will be erased and they're gone. That's fine. And that's a very formal procedure. And why am I saying formal? It ticks a box and it's good for people who can read code. So hence it's good to learn code, but most people can't. They can't go in or they don't put in the effort. It's also a perceptual issue. People comply with things like this when they perceive it to be fair. And that's a much broader thing. That's social. Fairness has a social function. It makes that we want to be in a society because we believe it's fair. So we can trust it. It's legitimate. So there's always more. So transparency will also be related to, once you make a decision with a code, are you going to be accountable for it? So when it goes wrong, will you correct it, for example, in favor or to do justice for the ones who have been impacted? These concepts are all related. So again, you see, it's both ways. It's not only transparency at the level of the design of the algorithm, it's also transparency in terms of like, why do you want to use this algorithm for that purpose? And are you accountable for it? Okay. Okay, because of the nature of current narrow AI limitations, it seems more suited for very specific tasks. However, the more senior the leader, the broader the working context required. So it seems current AI is a worse fit the higher the organization we go. Could you share examples of AI working effectively at the level of senior management? I like your summary, and that's more or less what is happening. The higher you go, of course, there's a lot of responsibility as well. The C-suite carries a lot of responsibility, but we also want to make our C-suite effective, which means when we hire consultants, usually consultants are in an organization, human consultants, they try to collect information, communicate it to the board, and we hope that all the information out there was summarized and put together in such a way that the board can make smart decisions in terms of the strategy. AI is so much better in getting all that information out there and summarizing it. And so it's the narrative. So you have narrative algorithms who can, there's a lot of work going on this, much better. But what still is required is, why do we use those data? How do we connect it? How do our stakeholders respond to it? And that's a big responsibility, again, for our C-suite. And there comes responsibility, accountability. So legally, an algorithm is not held accountable. So yes, we need to have leaders who are aware of what is happening and how to get the most information out. And that's where I say in our education, we need leaders that they are tech savvy enough to understand where and how to implement what kind of AI-enabled systems. At the same time, we also need to train them so that they can create the best value and pursue the strategy and purpose that fits society. So that's a dual approach there again. At the level of senior management, so the management that AI can take, and which I already demonstrated a little bit, is like, for example, as an advisor, where they collect data summarize it, see patterns across all departments, and can put this in formats that, and formats are already there, templates, that is easy to communicate to the board. So in that sense, they're an advisor. So when AI becomes part of a governance board, that's the role it should play. It's that kind of advisory role. But again, at the end of the day, responsibility lies with the human. Okay. Let me find a, do you see a day when we have self-improving algorithms, since reinforcement learning seeks optimization, or is it already here? Well, we see, well, self-improving is already happening. So that's the unsupervised learning. Neural networks, they start, so we provide examples, but they start looking at deeper layers. They make connections that we don't actually know anymore. So it's unsupervised. But the thing is, there are boundaries there as well. If it's too complex, AI as we know it today is unreliable. Like for example, if we would, and we try to use it in research, but if you want to study the cosmos, which is complete chaos, those prediction models can be very unreliable. So that's way out of reach. So the self-improvement you can see best in structured situations where we, an example is, for example, in hospitals with treatment. So research is happening where you see that when the sample size is one, so one patient, and we have the history of the kind of medication the person had to take, how the medication relates to the outcome variable, which is how does the patient feel? Is he or she progressing, getting worse, getting better? That those data that AI is actually, and this is the unsupervised learning, is able to pick up in ways that are pretty accurate and actually can put out prediction models there in terms of like, yeah, keep using this medication or something else is needed. So they're improving themselves even on such small data sets. Self-improving in the way you mean it, I think, means also that you have a kind of self-awareness, and that's lacking. So it's always going to be within the bounded condition. And there's an MIT professor who actually tries to apply this concept of bounded rationality, for example, that we are irrational. People have biases because we're not 100% rational. And bounded rationality refers to that concept. And in a way, AI doesn't have that because it tries to optimize. So it, in a way, it assumes we can make something perfect because we optimize, bring error rate to 0. So we always look for the optimal model. But sometimes when it comes down to human compliance and acceptance, you need a suboptimal model in the eyes of AI. Suboptimal meaning it's a compromise. It's a consensus between what humans value and what the optimal model is in terms of statistics. And that's a sense of awareness. And that kind of self-improvement AI doesn't have. In my view, how AI is used in management is still dependent on the ethics of the people in the management. Do you agree? Yes, very much so, actually. So again, this is why I am arguing to also educate STEM graduates, any other graduate, in sharpening the skills we already have as humans. And one skill is ethical judgments, right or wrong. Intuitively, we make mistakes, but we also make a lot of good decisions because we feel it's right or wrong. AI doesn't have that. And we can make sense of that. So I always put ethics training as part of leadership training as well. And that people see that people think in different ways sometimes about ethics, but they can make sense of it ultimately. So we need to put that on the education schedule, and we need to train our leaders. And of course, it's important for leadership to try to create the best value for most people involved. That's why I also say one of the 2 leadership types for the future is going to be purpose-driven leadership, because we need to know what kind of value are we trying to achieve and for what reason and who benefits from it. And that answering that question requires a moral sense of awareness. And it's also important because that focus then will help us to select the data we need in order to have optimal prediction models that will be optimal in light of the purpose we want to achieve. So yes, it's definitely needed. Okay, I believe AI is here to stay. How can our government play a role to educate our business leaders on the value? This also applies to SME leadership because they employ 70% of the workforce. The lack of talent is a challenge, and how can we overcome this challenge? Well, I think the first step is already, these steps are already being taken, motivating people to get the technical skills. And I would say for the majority, it's really going to be up to the level of tech savviness, that we understand what AI is, in what kind of forms we can use it. And it doesn't need to mean that you need to become a professional coder, but at least understanding the value that AI can provide. Because I think that's an important task of a government and any leader, is to really make AI meaningful to people. Why do we use it? And like Steve Jobs said, sometimes you have technology, but it doesn't mean you have to use it. It needs to serve a purpose. So the authorities are there to really they have to make that meaningful. They have to communicate that, and they have to show it, that it's meaningful. And get these skills. But like I said, in addition, people will start using AI. Organizations will employ, they don't only adopt it, they employ AI. And I see in my work as a consultant as well, I see that they adopt AI, but then the difficult part starts. Make a business case to use AI. And that's a problem. It's only about 20% of the cases, maybe worldwide, of companies who can really make good business cases, because that implies, okay, we know what AI can do. And we have these tasks to do to create this kind of value, and that's the strategy we follow. How does AI fit into this loop? So this is really like, you have a loop of humans, a decision-making process. How does AI fit in that? And where? Not at every level. You have to make those decisions. And many business leaders are simply not trained to do that. So we really need that kind of perspective as well. And it's the same with a nation, for governments. It's the same thing. It's not enough to have a governance document with ticking boxes and say, look, we've taken care of all of this. At the end of the day, it needs to become an accepted way of working. And that's legitimacy. It's perceived. It needs to be accepted. And that requires a lot of communication and demonstration on behalf of the authority. This is a good question. With the increasing amount of questionable or fabricated news and data available, fake news, could you talk about how AI systems might be able to navigate this world, seeing they're so dependent of data but unable to make reasoned judgments? I think it's a very good question because it's a very relevant question today. I think this is what happened in COVID-19. Because if I can be very critical, during COVID-19, let's say between December until now, the AI community has been relatively quiet. And what we see is that we've resorted to means that use the traditional statistical methods to predict whether our intensive care units are going to be under pressure or not, when we're going to flatten the curve, compare countries. Also with our behavior that we need to show as humans, we use behavioral change methods. We call it behavioral economics today, but it's still very old-fashioned. We put some paint on the road or on the paveways, and people follow it. Very old-fashioned. So we've resorted actually back to the technology we had before. AI wasn't there much. Yes, robots could help. You could see in China, certain robots could deliver food because there's no physical interaction anymore then. So robots are very useful in that sense. But AI community was actually not there. And one of the reasons is, in my view, is, yes, because we worked with incomplete data. Worldwide, people had to work with incomplete data and some data that were not accurate. And if that's not the case, then you see that many important pillars of an AI-driven world collapse. And why am I saying that? About 10 years ago, you saw suddenly more and more articles appear as well, like, with the new AI era, trust is the new currency. We want to trust. Blockchain is one of these exchanges. But trust is important. And of course it is important, because without trust, we can't trust our data. But it seemed that people started to believe once we use more technology, trust will follow. But that's the wrong kind of reasoning. What we're seeing today in COVID-19 is there's a lot of technology. But the technology itself doesn't work if people and nations don't trust each other. That's the other way around. So that's been a big challenge. I mean, even statistically, you can see that in certain countries, when you put it on certain criteria, the normal distributions are not there. So you know the data are not right. And that has led to certain disasters that certain countries, continents even, were not prepared well. They said, okay, with a mindset on technology, we'll rely on those data, we'll calculate our prediction models, and they were wrong. At that point, you need strong and intelligent leadership, which means, and I wrote an article on this, is that you need to have leaders who can anticipate. And AI also doesn't have that quality, to anticipate, because that means you need to be imagining different scenarios. You need to think about different realities, how implausible they may be, but are you prepared to deal with those when there's a crisis? And that's something uniquely human as well. Okay. Tuan? Xijing?
Yep, hi.
Hi, it's 11:38.
Yep, I think we just have time for one more question if you'd like to answer any last questions. Yeah.
Okay, let me see.
Get a good one.
I'll go upstairs. I'll go up a little bit because can I have you? Okay, very quickly, I see. I'll share someone asked for the source that algorithms involved in hiring workers can stay in job 15% longer. I will give that reference to SGInnovate. They can, or they can circulate it. Let me. Okay, this is an important societal question. Final one. How do we manage the digital divide in the sense that some people know how to work with AI and many don't? Will this create major problems in the economy and workforce? That's a big question. And a simple and straightforward answer is yes, that will be a major problem if we embark on a journey that we make all our nations smart. Then many people will be left behind if they don't skill up, upskilling. But of course, there's a lot of philosophical questions around this as well. And again, with COVID-19, what you can see is that you have certain people becoming aware of, is this the kind of society we want to create? Because they just see like, okay, we've been so focused on maximizing profit, optimizing our technology, just focused on business only, competitiveness, our rankings are important. Is this really the society I want? From that point of view, you could say, well, maybe we should do it differently. And some people, if you look at social media, they're really hoping that the new normal will be actually a completely different world. I don't think that's going to happen because I see too many companies in the starting blocks already ready to do the same as before. So what's going to happen is, like I said, the new normal will be an acceleration of all the trends that we saw before COVID-19. And that acceleration will be, when it comes down to AI, all the prospects and all the things that we think is going to change, we're going to apply that now because we've noticed that working from home, using technology works. No matter how many inconveniences there may be, it's an idea that our authorities have. So now it will come down to good leadership. Will we implement it and have no mercy and people will get lost? Will we implement it, show mercy, and we'll try to invest in training, which is happening to some extent, not in every country? Or will we try to actually work on our foundations of society again, address issues of inequality? We see the racial discussion is happening nowadays that has to do with inequality of society. And we address a few fundamental things and then see how AI can be used. And I think that third option, that would be my preferred one, because it brings everything together. Steve Jobs saying, we have technology, but that doesn't mean you have to use it. Well, what kind of technology can be used to make our society fair, to make our society advanced, but at the same time, we don't lose out on something? Those are big philosophical questions. And I think that's the third option that we should be pursuing. Okay. Okay, so my time is up. I really want to thank you for all your questions and listening to the story that I have. That is in my book, The Leadership by Algorithm. It's available now, so there's many more things in it. And if you're interested, you can always contact me. Google the Center on AI Technology for Humankind at NUS Business School is also working on many of these issues. So I hope to hear from many of you.
Thank you so much, Professor De Krumer, for the insightful presentation and leaving us with a lot of thoughts to ponder about. So as he has mentioned, if you would like to read more about the topic, do feel free to check out the links that I posted on the Zoom webinar chat, the Harriman House and the Amazon link to purchase the book. Yeah, and thank you so much all attendees for staying true till the end of the event. We'll be sending out a post-event email, and you can reach out to Professor through that and to view the recording if you'd like to see what you have missed. Yeah, thank you so much, and we hope to have you on our events again.
Okay.
David, thank you. Bye-bye.
Good luck. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
You too.